Welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, and a revolving panel of four distinguished international correspondents stepping back from the immediacy of breaking news to digest, decipher and discuss the week in all just 45 minutes. In a week that began with President Trump pronouncing that the ceasefire extension was so close with Iran, 2 or 3 days max, and that it would only take an hour to finalise. Hours later, Tehran downed a US Apache helicopter off the Gulf of Oman with the crew rescued from the sea. The attack reportedly an attempt to deter US's evolving efforts to increase air patrols in order to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. 2 nights of US military strikes across Iran followed, and counterattacks from the Iranian regime with strikes on US bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan. By Thursday, President Trump warned of hard attacks to come by nightfall, declaring a plan to capture Iran's Karg Island in the not-too-distant future. But the threat to strike cooled off. President Trump claimed Iran's leadership had blinked and approved the final points of a ceasefire extension. Iran's regime didn't quite say the same, but it sounds like a deal could be closer.
This week has brought wider attacks and further deterioration. I am profoundly concerned it could trigger a full resumption of conflict.
It's been a second week of mass demonstrations in Albania. What started as an environmental movement against plans by President Trump's family to build a luxury resort snowballed into a wider political movement, expanding by the day and even calling for the Albanian Prime Minister to resign. Demonstrators are calling it the Flamingo Revolution after the species native to the protective coastline, where Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are leading a consortium to create a multi-billion-dollar hotel project, also eyeing up the idyllic state-owned island of Sazan. Protests have increased since construction work appears to have started, and when Ivanka gave a podcast interview on how she wanted to develop it since being captivated by the island after hiking up it barefoot. Demonstrator says there's no transparency. Bernie Sanders waded in stateside, calling it Albanians versus the global oligarchy. The Albanian Prime Minister claims online bots, hostile states are behind this, magnifying the anchor, and environmental assessment is still underway. The European Commission reminding Albania not to take action that could undermine EU aspirations.
It's the first time that no political party is included, so we are very happy to be here and we hope we can achieve something.
It's been a week that's seen riots in Belfast, triggered by a brutal late-night street stabbing. The suspect, a Sudanese migrant, granted leave to remain in the UK for 5 years. Video of the attack going viral within hours, showing a sustained assault of a man in his 40s, bystanders rushing in, one using a wooden hurling stick to drive the attacker back. 2 days and nights of unrest followed. What began as calls to protest against the attack quickly turning into anti-immigration riots, amplified online, addresses linked to migrants and asylum seeker housing shared on social media, bricks thrown through windows, cars set alight, walls graffitied with the words local houses for local people. It's led to renewed debate over immigration enforcement and how to counter potential dog whistle politics and underlying racism while dealing with genuine concerns.
I support them. I support them. So we do, and what they're doing, because we've had enough.
The reason why we're on the streets is because of violence. We're not to be violent. Violence has brought us onto the streets.
And it's the week the biggest ever World Cup opened with the ceremony in Mexico in a stadium rich in football folklore, the Azteca, where Diego Maradona famously punched the ball into the net 40 years ago this month. He declared after scoring it had been, quote, a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. And so it was. Well, it was the hand of 3 red cards in the opening match as Mexico beat South Africa 2-0 in the first game. And as for controversies like the exorbitant dynamic ticket pricing and US visa travel bans imposed, blocked on entry, was the case of Omar Artan, the first ever Somali official selected by FIFA to referee at the World Cup. Denied entry at Miami Airport. The message from FIFA's boss, just, chill.
Maybe sometimes it's good as well to just, chill, relax. We work on everything. We try to solve everything. Sometimes to immediately start screaming and shouting has the opposite effect of finding a solution.
It's also been a week the pro-European party of the Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan won an election as he attempts to strengthen ties with Brussels whilst assuaging President Putin with a country heavily reliant on Moscow's oil and gas. OK, let's meet tonight's panel. Let's bring in Vivian Walt in the studio with me, Paris correspondent for Time Magazine and Fortune. Great to see you, Viv.
Great to see you.
Let me ask you about one thing that strikes me this week. Ukraine officially surpassing World War I in total duration of the conflict, 4 years, 4 months. There's lots of note pieces about this week. The Economist reports this. The seemingly chipper attitude of Volodymyr Zelensky, quoting, once a haggard, hollow shell of a man, can occasionally be seen smiling these days.
It is quite extraordinary, and you can detect that kind of slight shift in Zelensky, who, is a man who kind of wears his heart on his sleeve very much, and you have seen the phases of the war play out on his body and his face. There's clearly some sense that they've turned a corner and that they're on the winning side. They no longer have their back against the wall every moment of the day and night. There are reports out this week that the Russian economy is absolutely on its knees at this point. And I think that there is increasingly a sense that Ukraine has found a way to sustain itself through this war, which is quite extraordinary and nothing that I think we could have imagined in 2022.
It's an incredible illustration, as you're talking there, Viv, as well, this is Javi Aznarez for The Economist, just everybody sitting around a table, trying to work out what to do next in the Ukraine war. Tell us something else, here it is, which is, you've been looking at the G7. It's interesting this, on a day that we're reporting that Elon Musk is becoming the world's first trillionaire and SpaceX going public, they're going to be, at G7 in France next week, quite a few tech billionaires, the Leviathans.
The biggest, other than Musk and Zuckerberg, who were pointedly not on the invite list, you could say. There is no love lost between them and the French government, for that matter, the European Union. And however, there will be OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, Anthropic AI, now the biggest AI company in the world, Dario Amodei. What are they going to talk about? I mean, the G7 has really big AI issues to sort out. For example, how to tax these trillionaires or trillionaires soon to be, because OpenAI and Anthropic are also going public. And France, in a kind of effort to not blow up the G7, has decided to completely put that on the side. They will not raise the issue of taxes. So what are they doing? Bringing all the tech giants to the G7 summit. They're going to talk about child protection online, something that, of course, everybody can say yes to and agree on over a very fine lunch, and that will be it. So once again, the G7 is all about kind of appeasing Trump in a way that he doesn't kind of erupt in fury and walk out as he did last year at last year's G7 summit. And in fact, he's about to host the next G7 summit. So this is an organization somewhat in trouble.
It's an easy diplomatic steer away from controversy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Viv, brilliant to have you with us, as always. Let's go to Berlin. Let's bring in Stephen Erlanger, Chief Diplomatic Correspondent Europe for the New York Times, recipient of the French Légion d'honneur, knighted for services to journalism. Stephen, a warm welcome back to you.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be back, virtually.
Well, let's talk about something that's happening in Berlin and in Paris this week, which is the importance of this, European strategic autonomy, working together on defence, the grand vision. The German-French joint fighter jet disappeared into thin air this week. What went wrong, Stephen?
Well, what went wrong from the German point of view was Dassault, the great French company that makes jets and owns Figaro, by the way. And Airbus, the German part of Airbus, just got fed up with trying to work with Dassault. The Germans and the French have different ideas of what the plane should be in the end. So I think probably it was a good idea to stop it, because it really wasn't heading anywhere good. Now the question becomes, what will replace the Eurofighter and the Typhoon in the future? Will the French join with others? Will the Germans join with others? I expect so. There'll still be at least one European sixth-generation fighter. The two did agree to keep working on the cloud, because part of the point of this plane was to have drone planes around it to kind of protect it And so, I don't think it's a terrible thing. Everybody's wringing their hands. But I mean, this was really not going anywhere. The problem the French have, honestly, and I've written about this and others too, is the Germans have all this money to spend. I mean, they have vowed to spend 3.5% of their big GDP by 2030, and no one else is close to that. And by then, they'll be spending more than France and Britain put together without having to spend money on the expensive nuclear deterrence. So the fear is, at least in France, that French industry will be hurt and that European strategic autonomy will actually have a German accent. So this is a big issue, I think.
It's interesting because we're talking about issues in Europe, not just for the French and the Germans, but this kind of spectre of a Russian threat as well. The British Defence Secretary exiting stage left this week, leaving the Prime Minister, saying that he's been unable to increase defence spending, that the Treasury has been unwilling to do it, and saying actually this is leaving Britain exposed. It leaves the Britain's Prime Minister exposed as well. And also, Stephen, your newspaper, the New York Times, reporting today about NATO's top military officers weighing an alternative plan to defend Europe. The US is announcing, it reports that it's likely to cut the number of aircraft and warships for Europe.
Well, that is, I mean, it should be made clear these were cuts in equipment that the U.S. would provide in case of a real serious emergency. I mean, NATO has these readiness plans for who will fight in the first 30 days and then in the next 180 days. So what the Americans are saying is, previously you thought we would bring over X amount in case of a real war. Well, we're going to bring over less. So I suspect it's faster than Europeans wanted, but most of the stuff they're cutting down on, Europe can manage. Europe can actually provide what the Americans want to move to readiness in the Indo-Pacific. So again, one has the feeling that the Pentagon, there are people in the Pentagon trying to make this as painless as possible, but at the same time, it is a big kick in the butt to Europeans to get moving on providing more defense equipment for themselves. And the whole Starmer thing is fascinating just because the Brits just don't have the money. And frankly, the French don't have the money either. I mean, the ambitions are there, the rhetoric is there, but when are the French going to get to 3.5% of GDP on defense? Maybe not till 2034.
Yes, and to use a medical term...
I mean, these are real issues. Sorry.
To use a doctor's term, both for Britain and France, it will be the welfare spending that might have to be affected, and this is going to hurt, being the analogy, if there's going to be an increase in defence spending somewhere. Stephen, great to have you as always. Let's bring in our next guest. Let's welcome Naomi O'Leary, Europe correspondent for the Irish Times, co-host as well of the Irish Passport podcast, which explores Irish culture, history, politics as well. Naomi, welcome to the programme. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
You've been covering a very difficult story to cover this week, the Protect Our Children marches across France in light of the murder of an 11-year-old girl called Liana in the south. Many alleged systemic failures as well to protect her.
It seems to be the latest in a succession of incredibly grim stories coming out in France which relate to child protection flaws, I suppose. And so you could perhaps see it as maybe the straw that broke the camel's back, really, because it comes after weeks and weeks and even months of kind of growing anger, horror at a separate scandal, but I suppose perhaps related, regarding the abuse in Parisian nurseries and schools. So what we saw is, the protesters saying that this is really kind of one injustice too many. It's a horrendous story that an 11-year-old girl was murdered, and the person who is currently in custody suspected of doing that, it turned out, had several complaints about him already that hadn't progressed at all in the justice system, including a very recent and quite serious charge of rapes of a girl of similar age. It was just heartbreaking to hear the mother of that girl Rosa, the girl who wasn't killed, the girl who survived, saying that she'd been calling every Monday morning to ask where was the progress on their complaint, which had been made last summer. And she was always reassured that, the investigation was kind of progressing and ongoing. But nothing ever happened. He wasn't questioned. He wasn't taken into custody. And now he is, suspected of murdering a girl of a similar age. So this kind of has caused outrage, really. There were protests across France. As many as 60,000 people are calculated to have taken part. And it began to kind of take on an international dimension, I suppose, when it seemed to be putting the French government under real pressure. So you had the Justice Minister, Gérald Darmanin, saying he wouldn't resign, which is always a bit of a red flag.
Yeah.
If you have ministers saying they're not going to resign, and ministers being called in front of the Senate to answer questions and so on.
Yeah, and reporting in Le Monde today is suggesting that the US intelligence agencies had got in touch with French officials about concerns on the internet of paedophile allegations that allegedly weren't followed up. Great to have you on the programme, Naomi, tonight. Looking forward to your analysis. Let's complete the lineup. Let's cross to Tehran, Albania. Let's bring in the Politico Europe reporter, Jakob Weissman. Great to see you, Jakob. Thank you for being with us as well tonight.
Thanks for having me, Gavin.
We're going to talk in detail about events in Albania coming up. A brief word on the Groundhog Day moment, that is Election Day in Kosovo. Every 6 months, the past 16 months, there's been an election, including one at the weekend, a hung parliament, deadlock every time, so no one can govern properly. What happened this time? Did the Groundhog see the shadow of an unlocked government, or is it 6 more months of uncertainty?
Well, it remains to be seen whether the ruling party that has won for the third time in a row in a year and a half now, Albin Kurti and Vetëvendosja, will find a way to work with the other parties to find a coalition government. But at the moment, there's been no telltale signs that is going in that direction. I think that the dust is still settling on the most recent election. The hope does not seem to be surmounting once again because people, they just went again for the third time in a year and a half to the election. So it remains to be seen whether Vjosa Osmani from the Democratic League of Kosovo and from other party, the Democratic Party of Kosovo, will be able to find a way to work with Albin Kurti and to set aside their differences, while at the same time it was Kurti himself that decided not to back Vjosa Osmani as for her re-election for president in March, which was essentially what set this political crisis in motion. They still have their differences that they need to find a solution upon, but at the moment the dust is settling indeed.
Very interesting. But we had the ex-president on the programme a little bit earlier, Vjosa Osmani. There is talk that she might run for the prime ministership herself. She said she would be happy to try to come back as president. Jakob, great to have you alongside us as well. Let's begin just after 9 o'clock Thursday morning, New York. That's when Fox News broadcast its latest interview with President Trump, conducted by phone. He complained that his framing of the war with Iran is not reflected in the media, Fox aside. He claimed that Iran is privately making concessions that isn't making public, including regarding its nuclear ambitions.
It says you cannot have a nuclear weapon. We will not have. And I didn't like it. It wasn't strong enough because it said develop. You cannot develop. I said, no, I want buy also. So they fought me on that for a day, and then they agreed to it. You cannot develop or purchase a nuclear weapon. So it's we got everything, but the press just covers it so crazily. They
don't worry about it.
No matter what I do, the press will say, it was a great victory for Iran. These people are great.
Mr. President.
It's Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah, Mr.
He went on to say that he'd like to get a deal now, but, quote, doesn't know if America has the appetite to do it, because he's also said if he was given the choice, he would prolong it. He'd do something in terms of escalation. Well, 5 hours later, in a week of re-escalating attacks and counterattacks with Iran, he posted on social media that, quote, a very hard attack was coming Thursday night. He warned that the US would be taking Karg Island in the not-too-distant future, which would assume control of Iran's oil and gas market. 5 hours after that, he called it off. He said discussions and final points had been approved with Iran's leadership. There will be a signing ceremony, reportedly in Europe, being announced shortly. And what became a pattern of pushback and denial originally from Iran's regime, the foreign ministry spokesperson saying that it's merely speculation. Today it appears the foreign minister is saying that they are almost there. Viv, let's start with you. Your reading of where things stand, particularly the escalation this week, and whether these two deals, there seems to be a leaked deal this week, is Trump talking about the same deal as the Iranians?
Well, I mean, even listening to your explanation of what's happened in the last few days, a little, discombobulating, shall we say. Look, Trump has said that they have a quote-unquote ceasefire, I think something like 38 times in the last couple of months, since there was something vaguely called a ceasefire, which of course has never been actually a cessation of fire, as you just mentioned. There is zero trust between these two sides. They are effectively trying to negotiate not a ceasefire, a memorandum of understanding. It's a very, very temporary, kind of flimsy little piece of paper with which Trump can go to the G7 on Monday and say, look, as he said in the Oval Office today or yesterday, I believe, we ended the war, were his words. Mm-hmm. Well, the war is obviously not ended. Both sides are desperate for some kind of end to the war. For Trump, there are, major risks to the midterm elections. For Iran, their economy is, been battered. And the whole world economy is now, very dependent on the Strait of Hormuz reopening. The problem is that Iran has really proved what incredible leverage it has over something which never really knew how much it really had.
It's worth saying, just listening to Viv, Stephen, President Trump told reporters on Wednesday he directed the military execute a secret mission, he said, in the past month to support commercial shipping. He said, quote, we've been taking millions of barrels of oil. Nobody knows it, he said. We took out the other night 22 ships late at night with no lights. He followed up on Truth Social. He said more than 100 million barrels have been taken out, 200 ships of the Strait. So this is 2 days after Iran downed an Apache close to the Strait. So there appears to be military events about the Strait that's been going on, perhaps to lesser public knowledge this week until we've heard from President Trump. What's your take?
Well, I think Trump's exaggerating. CENTCOM has denied that amount of ships. A few ships have come through, escorted very close to the Omani side. But in brighter terms, the hope is that this will get signed, this memorandum of understanding will get signed Sunday or Monday. It may be that J.D. Vance goes to Geneva to sign it. They are really, really close. Trump's problem is how he will sell this as any kind of victory, as anything stronger than the 2015 nuclear agreement he called the worst deal in history and pulled out of 3 years later, which helped lead us to this quandary. Now, he keeps saying, Iran will promise never to build a bomb. Well, under the man they assassinated, Khamenei, there was a fatwa, a religious prohibition against building a bomb. Now, Iran was certainly becoming a nuclear threshold state. They were building quite a lot of enriched uranium close to weapons grade without actually trying to build a bomb itself. But after this war, the religious government has really been replaced by almost a kind of Praetorian Guard, a very hardline military group dominated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps under the guise of an Islamic regime. And they are, they've now absorbed the thing that Iran feared the most, which was a US-Israeli joint war on them. They've absorbed it. They've survived it. They don't have it to fear anymore. So a lot of the constraints are gone. And you can see it, the way they've been attacking U.S. bases, the way they've been attacking neighbors in the Gulf. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to end up with a much harder line Iran. Yes, it has terrible economic problems, and there may be protests down the road. But it's very hard to see the United States and Trump coming out of this with any sense of real victory. Yeah. And the Memorandum of Understanding will talk about a 60-day period to really negotiate the details of what will happen to Iran's nuclear program, its enriched uranium. I'm very skeptical that after 60 days they're going to come to an agreement. It may be very much like the Gaza deal that Trump pushed, which sort of ended the fighting, but hasn't yet resulted in real implementation. So I think that's one of the things that we have to watch very carefully.
And so a couple of the points you mentioned, Stephen, one of them on Geneva possibly being a place to talk. As we're on air, senior administration official in the White House saying to Reuters, this in the past couple of minutes, Europe is being discussed as a site for signing, but it's no final decision on that yet, but it goes to your point. And also the Iranian military spokesperson telling State TV, this is in the past minute, I cannot confirm yet any of the details of the memorandum. No surprise there. So that says things stand. And to Stephen's point as well on the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, it matches with what the Washington Post has also been reporting today, saying this: US intelligence assessments indicate Iran's regime remains intact, but it's becoming more hardline. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps consolidating power. Domestically, it's gained influence, repressing dissent and sidelining moderates. Naomi, you've been looking this week at the plight of those still stuck in the Strait of Hormuz.
It's often overlooked, but there are tens of thousands of mariners on board ships who have been stuck in deteriorating conditions and really difficult psychological conditions. So there used to be, I think it's about 150 ships a day used to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and that has slowed to a trickle, maybe 4 a day, something of that order. It means there's this enormous backlog of ships which are stuck at anchor, many of them. They have crews on them. These are people from countries like India, often Indonesia, Russia, sometimes Ukraine. Those are a few of Philippines, a few of the kind of labor nations. And unfortunately, in conditions like this, companies can go bankrupt, which leads to a really awful situation of abandoned ships. Now, we're not currently aware of ships that have been abandoned so far due to this freeze on shipping or enormous reduction in shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. But there were some ships there already that were already abandoned. What that means is basically workers stuck on the ships. They don't have any, they've got dwindling fuel supplies, dwindling food. The company that owns the ship might be difficult to establish. They often have kind of unclear ownership structures, and that leads to a horrible situation of lack of accountability. Those people don't know how to get home. They don't know how to get their wages. They don't want to leave the ship because it's their only leverage to actually get paid. And so this is kind of the spectre looming over people who are stuck in this situation. In the meantime, you know, they're under pressure to provide for families back home, and they don't know how to get out. They don't know when they'll be able to get home. And this can be incredibly psychologically stressful for them. So it's kind of this humanitarian situation that's really unprecedented. You know, speaking to representatives of mariners, you know, workers' organizations and so on, they can often be, they're kind of the overlooked backbone of the global economy. And they're a vulnerable group kind of to begin with, often coming from developing countries. And there's a kind of a really unclear legal situation often at sea, where it's difficult to know what jurisdiction these things fall under. So those people on the ships are, you know, they shouldn't be forgotten. No. Also because they're physically in danger. So many have been seized, they've been fired upon, some of them have died. And every time there's a flare-up in hostilities, they can see the munitions flying overhead, and they're often on oil tankers. They're very afraid of debris falling on them and going alight. So it's a really horrible situation.
No, to the point this week as well that the Indian staff killed on a tanker this week, and those still waiting is worth saying as well. I think since effectively the Strait closed since March, so all of those people you're talking about, that's what 98 days now still stranded in the Strait. Let's move from Iran to Albania, where we're seeing the largest sustained wave of protests in years. 12 days in Tehran, thousands of demonstrations have filled Skanderbeg Square in the heart of the capital. Signs saying the Flamingo revolution. Prime Minister Edi Rama must resign, and our coast is not for sale. Now, the coastline in question in Albania is the Nata Lagoon, as well as the Sazan Island. Remote, wild, protected marine environments, say the locals. Increasingly a dream destination for tourists. This is how it looks on social media. Also 12 days ago, President Trump's daughter Ivanka gave an interview on a podcast where she talked about how she was captivated by the island. She had plans to transform it with her husband, Jared Kushner, with care.
An unbelievable, beautiful 1,400-hectare private island in the middle of the Mediterranean. We were on a friend's boat and we stopped for a swim. Effectively, that's how we found it. We swam to the island. We went on a hike, barefoot all the way up to the top, and we were just captivated. And it stayed with us ever since. And over the course of many years, we developed the opportunity to help realize its potential and transform it.
There are two separate areas. They're 40 kilometres apart. They're included in a plan for a luxury resort by Affinity Partners. They're headed by Jared Kushner. They're heavily backed by Saudi Arabia. Cezanne Island has been given government approval for the project as of last year. Reported cost of $1.2 billion. The goal for the Narta Lagoon wetlands is still in the planning stages. That's the area filled with the flamingos. There's a reported $4 billion being spent on the resort there. Construction-related activity reported since April. Jakob, what's at the heart of these protests? What are you seeing? What are the people saying?
Yes, you can really tell that this is the most historic moment in the country since the fall of communism in 1991. I mean, it started with the protection of this protected wildlife area, the Narta and Cezanne, of course, but it's blown up. This is something so much more. I mean, now it's the 12-day protest. People are out on the streets right now in Skanderbeg and down the boulevard. And they're not just demanding for the college to be cancelled, but they want to be rid of the Albanian ruling class, a political elite that have ruled the country for the past 35 years. I mean, not only with Prime Minister Edi Rama, but also the opposition leader, Sali Berisha, they want him gone as well. And just yesterday, I spoke with Sali Berisha, who was in a good mood because his non grata, he was blacklisted by the United States in 2021, was just removed. And he kind of pushed back on, as you can tell, that the opposition, there is no apparent opposition in these protests. It's a citizen-led protest. It's the people's movement, because this mentality since communism has not, it seems to have changed much. Because when they went from Hoxha to Berisha and now Rama, and there's been a massive immigration from Albania, rising wages. The country remains one of the poorest in Europe, and it seems to be lagging far ahead in its aspirations to join the EU, which what is happening now. The EU, as you mentioned, the EU has cautioned them against going forward with this project. I mean, at the moment, Rama tells that there is no project, and then at the same time, he told reporters, he told us a few days ago that he's going to continue the project no matter what. And what they told the European Commission was that they had informed that the project was suspended. I was just there a few days ago, and I could see the cement foundations from the fences where the work had begun to start. They had actually dug up a road that stretched on for 2 kilometers in the protected area. So it's very, very obvious that they tried to start the works, and that's why the activists, as we see the video in late May, you saw a protest that was being dragged across the cliff, which sparked so much outrage to the point where people are now, tens of thousands are on the street all across the country. You have protests in Berlin, Brussels, the US, the UK. I mean, this is really, you can really feel the thickness in the air of a political revolution. And it's in my 10 years of covering Albania, I've never seen anything quite like it.
Well, if you're listening on the podcast version later on, we're watching live images right now. We can see thousands of people as we speak in the main square of Tirana. Jakob, you talk about seeing what appeared to be construction work. Edi Rama saying that it's just environmental checks at the moment. But what you're saying suggests that what's been happening for weeks has been work underway. He famously, the Prime Minister, said Albania needs tourism like a desert needs water. It's one of the poorest countries within Europe. He also blames bots for accelerating the anger. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, many people that I speak to, I mean, Rama, it's just him right now. I mean, I don't think that he has many advisors around him. I think that his comms team seem to not have any say in what he's been posting, and he's been arguing with Bernie Sanders, he's been arguing with the Iranian government. I mean, it's unprecedented what is happening, and how, Rama is also, there's been rumors that he's scheduled to have a counter protest tomorrow. I mean, it's yet to be confirmed, but if there is to be a counter protest on the other end of the square, it seems to be a bit of a provocative manner in order to clash between these protesters, because on Saturday is when most people are free across the country from work and will descend upon Tirana. And I think that the numbers will grow. I mean, each day I've been at the protest for the last 6 days, and I continue to see the numbers growing despite Rama claiming that it was only up to 8,000. And in the matter of, I mean, there was also the case that it was Israel Cultural Week at the same time, because each week, Albania celebrates the relationship with one country onto the next. And they had removed the Israeli flags we've seen in videos because they would have had provoked the protesters, because there's been these links with the conspiracy theories with Jared Kushner because of his Jewish background and his involvement in the Abraham Accords. Some things about repopulating Palestinians in Gaza in this protected wildlife area, and very, very unsubstantiated conspiracy theories that Rama pointed out to. You showed the video of Ivanka Trump explaining her discovery of this island. I mean, the island is not at the point of controversy. These plans are not in motion yet for the island, as we're aware of. But when I spoke to the locals and I told them the story that Ivanka had told, they said you cannot go to that island. You cannot walk barefoot. You cannot go on a hike. There is glass everywhere. There's been told that there's explosive mines from the days of communism, because it used to be a barracks for the military. There are snakes everywhere. I mean, this story is just very, very unlikely, in my opinion, from what I've been told by locals.
Very interesting. Jakob, we're still seeing these images ongoing right now as we speak, and you can hear the sounds of the protests as well. Viv, Bernie Sanders framing this in the US this week as the global oligarchy versus the people. What's your take on events?
I mean, I find the context that Jakob just gave to be absolutely fascinating, because obviously within Albania, which is a small, poor country, this is about so much more than just the development of one island. But outside Albania, this kind of touches on something very fundamental, and Bernie Sanders puts his finger right on it by talking about the global oligarchy. Here you have a president of the United States who is far and away, by every measure, the most corrupt, self-dealing leader of the US ever in its 250th anniversary history, and this is his daughter. So her tale about finding what she called a private island, whatever that means, as far as we know, it isn't owned by somebody. It's a private island that she happened upon, like you found like a little treasure box on the sand or something.
Travels. Yes.
And why not? It's only 1.2 billion. It's, cacahuète, as the French say. And so, one can just imagine. And the kind of the feeling of being so irked among the Albanians that somebody like her would essentially have a claim to just buying the island, effectively buying the island. It'll be obviously a luxury resort, but that will be it for the island, probably. So I think that it touches a kind of way deeper feeling of people feeling so like little ants in a world of just, unfathomable wealth.
And Stephen, the European Commission saying it's monitoring events, as Jakob pointed out, that it expects Albania to refrain from environmental actions that could undermine EU accession. How do you see this?
Well, I was very struck by Ivanka's wearing Flamingo pink blouse when she gave that interview. Look, I keep thinking of Serbia. There have been huge, regular protests against Alexander Vučić in Serbia, who's a very similar figure to Edi Rama, let's be honest. And they keep coming, and Vučić keeps sitting there. And Edi Rama is a very clever guy. There's a lot of corruption in Albania. And it will be very interesting to see if the more serious part of these demonstrations have real force and change the government there. It is also worth pointing out in Belgrade, Jared Kushner was very much invested in repurposing the old defense ministry building that was bombed during the Kosovo War into a very fancy hotel, and the protests were such that he finally gave up the desire to to actually do that. So maybe that is motivating Albanian protesters too.
It is. It's a very interesting comparison and very interesting thought to close for tonight on Albania as those protests continue or still remain across that and with the Jakob 2 this weekend. But let's go to Belfast. 10:30 Monday night in Kinnaird Avenue, North Belfast. Neighbours heard shouting, screaming. Coming from outside their windows. In the street, a man was lying on the ground, suffering from a brutal attack with a man wielding a kitchen knife. Caught on camera, locals ran out to intervene. A car stopped and one man got out. He used a wooden hurling stick to beat the attacker back. What happened that night has led to riots in Belfast for 2 consecutive nights. Police now dealing with the aftermath. Back out on the streets again tonight to prevent further violence, with the action and the reaction both under the spotlight. The suspect, a 30-year-old Sudanese man, Ladid, charged with attempted murder. The victim is in an induced coma. He's lost an eye. He's said to be stable. There are questions being asked too of politicians on how the suspect came to be in Belfast, going from Paris to Dublin, given leave to remain as a migrant by only having to fill in a questionnaire, it's reported, rather than face a face-to-face interview. Questions and fears brought protesters to the street. Protesters have turned into riots. The Times describing the violence as a modern-day pogrom, with men in black clothes, balaclavas targeting migrant communities. Let's go to Naomi. Watching this, Naomi, an area and a region you know very well, tell us how the week has played out. This apparent hit list too that the police say has been circulating.
So there's kind of 2 aspects to this, right? So this is part of an international pattern where incidents of violence by people who are of ethnic minority backgrounds, particularly asylum seekers, if documented, are deliberately spread online, including by people who are very far away. There are far-right networks who kind of thrive off this and do make money off of this. And this is a pattern that we've seen in a number of different countries. It's happened in the UK a number of times. It also happened not so long ago in Dublin. Now, this sort of violence that is focused in this online behaviour is always very selective. So people are attacked with knives often in Belfast, but the riots only happen when the perpetrator and victim fall into particular narratives. So this is something that is an international pattern. The second part of this is the character of the response in Belfast is informed by historical events. So when you see attacks on communities, houses, firebombing of cars, masked men seeking out people from a particular ethnic background, unfortunately, this is part of a history. It's kind of a learned behaviour. There's a heritage of this in Belfast. It's just that the victims now are different from what they were in the 1960s, because, of course, Catholics were driven out of these very streets a few decades ago by loyalist, British identifying gangs who wanted to kind of ethnically cleanse their neighbourhoods. And we're kind of seeing a historical echo of that, except anxieties now are about immigration. So there's a kind of a multi-layered issue going on here. The violence over the last 2 nights now has calmed a bit. But I suppose the thing is about riots like this is once it becomes understood that a particular trigger event will cause a riot or will cause violent protests or upheaval, it becomes self-fulfilling. We saw that even in Paris, for example, with the Paris Saint-Germain game. I saw that municipal authorities prepared for unrest in advance of that because everybody knows it can be a trigger. It's exactly the same with this. And so now what we have is scrutiny and people searching for events like this to dramatise and to exploit to further anxieties and fears about immigrants.
Viv, listening to Naomi, just give a very interesting account of some historical context as well. We have this kind of national flashpoint that's born out of immediate fears, a viral video, and those asking genuine questions, safety, security, community, wanting answers about how the suspect came to be there. Suddenly, the risk of just being drowned out in the unrest, the threats, the racism.
Yes, and if you think about the kind of crisis around 2015 in Europe, around the migration crisis and the kind of almost, frenzied sort of like fears of being overrun by immigrants and, all of that tenor through the conversation, I think what's so interesting and what's so different now is that, of course, it was all captured on video. and in fact in the most gruesome graphic detail, so that these kind of what might be visceral fears actually sort of became very concrete, and in some ways far easier to go viral, if you can excuse the cliche, but even Elon Musk took a moment out of his busy IPO week to rant about the immigration threat in Northern Ireland as if it had some, direct bearing on his life. So it's really, I think that is actually the major difference between previous crises like this and this moment.
And it's hyper-amplified. Viv, always good to hear from you, all of you tonight. Thank you so much to a fantastic hand-picked panel, always specific to each week and taking us to places that AI chatbots cannot with their experience. Trusted on-the-ground, real-world reporting. Thank you to Viv Walt, Paris correspondent for Time Magazine and Fortune Magazine. Stephen Erlinger, thank you, Chief Diplomatic Correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. Thank you to Naomi O'Leary, Europe correspondent for the Irish Times, co-host of the Irish Passport podcast. And thank you to Politico Europe reporter Jakob Weissman in Tirana. Thank you, Jakob. Have a good weekend, all of you. We will leave you with the beautiful spectacle this week of the inauguration of the final spire of the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, illuminated by lights and fireworks led by Pope Leo, who gave a ceremonial blessing and a tribute to the creativity and vision of Antoni Gaudi 100 years on from his death. After 144 years, the finish, however, is still 10 years away. The Pope summed up the beauty and the vitality of the incomplete, saying, quote, "The fact is, the incomplete is not a flaw, for it bears witness to a desire. It does not signify a shortcoming, but rather expresses a promise that we wish to honour with consistency." We'll leave you with the beautifully illuminated nightscape of the Catalan capital and see you in 7 whole days for the consistently incomplete world next week.